Well, I am honored to be here. I am really honored to be here because you all do such important work and are gain so little money-wise. It's challenging work, and I'm proud that I'm here. I hope that something I have to say will be meaningful to you. I can tell you that I wish my father could see me now. Lots of things about him about me caused him to scratch his head in bewilderment, and this certainly would have been one of them. How did his daughter end up in East Rutherford, New Jersey, speaking to a conference of sexuality educators? But then, you know, what in my father's life would have caused him to fret about a woman's down there? You know, well, that's what it would have been called in his time, right? In the unlikely event that it would have been referred to at all. Why would he have given a thought to the fact that so many women and girls don't understand they're down there, or how their lives can often be determined by that in both bad ways and good? Nor could he have suspected that his own daughter, whose puberty was particularly fraught, would in her later years find her calling, well, at least one of them, in studying why this is so for so many boys and girls and what can be done about it. I assume that some of you are also wondering what the heck I'm doing here. So I will try. I didn't know that Bill was going to be showing that little video. I'm going to try to explain tonight how I got here, as well as what I'm trying to do about the fraughtness of it all. Because, of course, I'm not unusual. Most adolescent girls' puberty is fraught. Fraught because of the cultural contradictions in this country, which on the one hand tell girls that they shouldn't be sexy, they should be good, they should wait to be married to have sex, and if they carry condoms, they're asking for it. While on the other hand, the media seems to encourage them to be sexy in order to be popular and have a boyfriend. And adolescence is also fraught because in the midst of all these contradictions, a teenager's burgeoning sexuality is so bound up with his or her sexuality. And adolescence is, of course, particularly fraught for the 25 to 30% of girls who've been raped, incested, and otherwise sexually abused, and that is a lot of girls. All too often, teens don't have anyone that they can talk to except other fraught teens. And it doesn't help that many of the adults who they're supposed to be able to turn to for answers and support don't understand them, not really, or even like them very much. It doesn't take long when you're dealing with adolescents to see that many adults who serve them don't really like them. And it's kind of understandable. They're no longer the cuddly, sweet, needy children they once were, right? They can be sullen and remote. They seem to think we're all intolerably dumb, and they give the impression that they aren't interested in anything that we have to say. My grandson is a prime example. I remember seeing a sign on a restaurant door once that said, "Quick, hire a teenager while they still know everything." I lost my mother when I was 12. Like many teenagers, I had so many issues about sex and relationships and my down there. I was convinced, truly, that when God was passing out vaginas, I got a faulty one. When I was 14 in the 1950s, Christine Jorgensen underwent the first highly publicized man-to-woman transgendering. And I was absolutely convinced that, like her, I had been born the wrong sex. Pretty heavy stuff to be confused about all by yourself. I remember the hours spent, with the mirror, trying to get the light right so that, you could, and being completely confused about what I was seeing, thinking the clitoris was really a not yet quite matured penis, those kinds of things. It was really scary. Of course, even if my mother had been alive, I wouldn't have been able to talk to her about any of it. I'd tried that once with pretty sorry results. But in time, a very smart stepmother came into my life, and she brought me to an OBGYN named Dr. Lazar Margulies, who happened to be the pioneer of the now famous spiral-shaped plastic IUD. And I was one of the very first, if not the first person in the United States to have one inserted in me, and it served me very well for very many years. But it wasn't really the IUD that made the difference. It was Dr. Margulies himself. He took his time with me. I was able to confess my fears and shame, and he really listened without judging or laughing, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. I've often wondered what would have become of me if I had not been fortunate enough to have a doctor like that. I sometimes imagine I'm a poor girl of color with all the same fears and issues, but no health care and no access to a physician. How likely it would have been that I'd have gotten pregnant and had a baby and thus been unable to finish school or attend college. Because of my stepmother and Dr. Margulies, I never got unintentionally pregnant. But oh, how many times in the 50s, when abortions were illegal, that I, again with the help of that stepmother, arranged for my friends to go to Cuba, Switzerland, or some very, very private, very, very expensive clinic where they could get an abortion. I was always aware of how we benefited from privilege, from being moneyed, and wondered what would have happened if we'd been poor. And as I was writing this, it occurred to me that, because I did always think, imagine if I was different, if I wasn't privileged. And I think that I did that because I grew up with my father's films, like Grapes of Wrath and The Oxbow Incident and 12 Angry Men. I think that instilled those kinds of values in me. In the 70s and 80s, my then husband, Tom Hayden, and I ran a children's camp north of Los Angeles in Santa Barbara, up in the mountains. Every summer for 15 years, I got to observe and interact with teenagers from all walks of life, children of movie moguls, children of movie stars, Angelina Jolie when she was 14 and her brother, kids who were referred by parole officers, children who spoke no English, farm workers' children, Cesar Chavez's children, Willie Nelson's children, Black Panther's children. We offered many different programs, but probably the most important thing we provided the teens, aside from the diversity they were exposed to, were the responsible counselors and the nurse, adults who were not parents, who would listen without judgment, sometimes for hours at a time, answering their questions and hugging them. I realized that they all needed hugs, safe hugs. Some would whisper about the confusing new sexual feelings they were experiencing and needed to be told that this was normal, but that they didn't need to act on these feelings. There were girls who were clearly promiscuous and who were cutters and who in time spoke of having been sexually abused, and I was stunned by how many of them there were. One of these girls has subsequently become a member of my family. She told me that the camp was important to her because she was about 14 when she told me this. It was the first time in her life that she had met people who thought about the future. And that rocked me to my core. I just assumed that all young people thought about the future. And I realized then that along with everything else we did, we have to help young people see a future for themselves. There were kids who were afraid of mud and tall grass and a sky full of stars because they'd never seen these things before. There were the 4 tough gangbanger wannabes from East LA who roomed with blonde, pale Michael. He couldn't walk because he had muscular dystrophy. At first, the boys needed to prove they were macho and they teased him. But by the end of camp, when he never complained and even was able to swim across the pool by himself, they cheered him and carried him everywhere. And it seemed to me their sense of what it takes to be a real man had shifted a little bit. Much of the work that I do now was informed and inspired by what I learned at that camp. In the 1990s, I was married to Ted Turner. I was with him when he created his family foundation with a dual but interrelated focus on population and the environment. I understood why population growth was damaging the planet's finite resources, but I didn't know what the most effective strategy would be to stabilize growth. Educating girls, sterilization, I knew that wasn't politically correct. Getting more condoms out, I just didn't know what the solution was. So I began to study the issue, and in 1995, I became the Goodwill Ambassador to the UN Population Fund. And in that capacity, I traveled to Cairo to attend the UN Conference on Population and Development. I went looking for a solution to population growth. I came back with a strategy for adolescent pregnancy reduction. Up until then, all UN conferences on population had been run by men, and the plans of action had all been about setting quotas as to how many children should be born. This conference was different. Women, for the first time, were at the table, led, by the way, by Bella Abzug. At least the United States delegation was headed by Bella Abzug. The women at the table making decisions were frontline workers like you, on-the-ground workers who knew better than anyone why it is that women were having large families and what had to happen for that to change. At the panels I attended, I learned that educated girls have fewer children, that condoms are important, but in many cultures, women are beaten or even killed for using them, so that it was critical for healthcare providers, for clinics, to provide women and girls with a wide array of contraceptive choices. Having a choice, I learned, was also empowering. I learned the importance of postponing the first birth, the birth of the first child, for as long as possible. How culture and economic conditions and gender-based power disparities mattered when it came to family planning, that uneducated women who earned no money had no strength to negotiate the spacing and timing of their children. I learned that girls, this is really important, that girls experience adolescence very differently than boys, tending to lose their voices, or they don't lose them, the voices go underground with puberty. Whereas boys tend to experience an increase in social power in adolescence, and that successful programs took these differences into consideration. At that time, my home state of Georgia had the highest rate of teen pregnancy rates and repeat pregnancies in the entire country. So I paid particular attention to the panels on adolescence, and I learned that young people have their own unique sets of needs, and a health clinic will fail at reaching teens if the staff hasn't been trained to address these specific needs. I returned to Georgia determined to apply what I had learned to the realities there. One day, shortly after my return from Cairo, I was preparing to launch the Georgia Campaign for Adolescent Pregnancy Prevention, GCAPP, and touring the state to see what was going on in this arena. I saw that we had our own amazing frontline workers, but that they were very isolated, that they did not feel they were part of a community, often inadequately trained, and challenged in the extreme in a state where at the time the moral majority held sway. Ralph Reed started in Georgia, after all. No abortions, no contraception, no family planning allowed. It was an uphill, no sex education allowed. It was an uphill slog made much more difficult by the fact that I was a controversial movie star coming from Hollywood. What did I know? One day, I was touring a maternity hospital in a county called Albany, Georgia. And I was taken to a cubicle where a 14-year-old black girl was in labor with her second child. Before I went in, a nurse had told me that the girl lived in a tar paper shack with no indoor plumbing. I looked down into her dark, expressionless eyes that stared back up at me as though challenging me to judge her. I wish I had kissed her. Just like our campers, she needs someone to take her in their arms and not let go for about 20 years. I wondered if anybody ever had, except during sex. I have subsequently learned that 60% of teen mothers her age have been victims of early sexual abuse, and I'm certain that that 14-year-old was one of them. I knew that no one should judge such a girl. I also realized that giving her condoms wouldn't be enough. So what if I had supplied her with 6 years worth of contraception, enough to bring her to 20 years of age? What else did she have in her life besides her child, soon to become children? How could I tell her not to have any more children unless I could promise her a future that would motivate her to use the contraceptives? What could just say no mean to a girl like this? What could abstinence until marriage mean? But then, too, what does it mean that there are OBGYNs in Georgia, just as there are congressmen in Congress, who believe that a girl can't get pregnant from a rape? It didn't take long after my return from Cairo for me to learn that even if that 14-year-old girl in Albany, Georgia, had been examined by an OBGYN prior to her first pregnancy, the doctor probably would not have known how to identify sexual abuse. And on the outside chance they picked up on it, they wouldn't have known what to do with the information on how to protect the girl and get the perpetrator behind bars. And that is one reason why I founded the Jane Fonda Center at the Emory School of Medicine, Emory University School of Medicine, that is, to address a myriad of training, curricula development, and research needs around adolescent reproductive health and sexuality. I also endowed the Marion Howard Chair in Reproductive Health. Maybe some of you know or knew Marion Howard. She was a pioneer in our field, and she was one of my early mentors. For a number of years, she was the director of the Jane Fonda Center, And now Dr. Missy Kotke, I don't know if any of you know her, she is currently our director. In our 14-year history, the center has trained DFACS workers and doctors not only to help identify sexual abuse, but to learn how emotional and physical abuse, poverty, racial prejudice, pregnancy, homophobia, and alcohol substance abuse can affect adolescent cognitive development. We're developing and evaluating a clinic-based intervention to increase the use of dual protection, which means, as you know, protection against both pregnancy and STIs. We've created a curriculum called Media Madness, which helps girls and boys gain media literacy so that they'll be less vulnerable to media influences that might encourage risk-taking. By the way, I see someone taking notes. You can go on the website of the Jane Fonda Center at Emory and get all these information on all these programs and curricula. We also do a program called Start Strong Atlanta, which targets 11 to 14-year-olds to prevent teen dating violence and abuse, and to teach teens something that they all seem to want to know more than anything else. How do I know it's a real relationship? What is a real relationship supposed to feel like? I get asked that question so many times. Through Ford Foundation funds, the Jane Fonda Center is exploring the need to alter current sex education frameworks to intersect more dynamically and meaningfully with the core needs of young people, those that are essential to healthy sexual living now and in the future. Again, I often think back to that 14-year-old girl in Albany, and I imagine her coming into a clinic, being hurried into an examination room and asked to spread her legs for a pelvic exam. I would expect she'd run away like a scared rabbit and never come back. Or she'd experience what many girls do when they go into a clinic. They feel judged by the staff. That's another problem, that these young girls who are already victims and who desperately need the help of clinicians don't get it because the clinicians aren't properly trained to receive them. As I've said, that adolescent needs are so different than adults' needs, and it's not just about having a clinic that's open at hours that are helpful for teens, after school, for example, and on weekends. It's much more than that. Teens need time. They need time to build a trusting relationship with a service provider. They need time to get all of their complex questions answered. They need to talk about feelings. They need to ask and hear what a relationship should be like, what it should feel like. They need doctors and nurses who can identify sexual abuse and do a one-time interview and exam that can hold up in court. They need to be seen as whole people, not just problems that exist from the waist to the knees. And this is why in 2000 I made a lead gift to enhance a state-of-the-art teen-friendly clinic at Grady Hospital in Atlanta, which is the largest emergency hospital in the Southeast. The clinic receives Title X funding, and the services are free. The director of the Jane Fonda Center is also the medical director of the clinic. We see about 2,500 teens a year, and I'm proud to say that we see boys as well as girls. It's very hard to get boys to come to clinics, usually, and then come back again. And it's usually their girlfriends who bring them, but we offer free sports physicals. And that encourages boys to come back. And as they come back, they begin to develop that indispensable relationship with the doctor or nurse or the male counselor. And we also have peer educators. I learned, as perhaps some of you did from Dr. Marian Howard, the importance of peer educators, that teens very often receive information more profoundly when it's coming from other young people their age. These peer educators meet with them in the reception area or in special activity rooms. And then 20 years ago, this coming January, I founded GCAPP, a statewide intermediary organization, which is to say that rather than providing direct services ourselves, we train other people. We train trainers, we train teachers. At last count, we trained 100 teachers in 41 elementary, middle, and high schools to implement medically accurate, age-appropriate curricula reaching over 14,000 students. This is really hard work. I know that you all know this better than I do, but this speech is being taped, and somebody may go on your website who doesn't know how hard it is, so I'm just going to say why it is so hard. In the beginning, I would get impatient that we weren't making progress fast enough until I realized you can't just get to the teens. You have to go to the gatekeepers. And that means the mayor, the sheriff, the principals of the school, the teachers, the parent, everyone between you and the young people have to be, their trust has to be gained. They have to believe in you. You have to make them understand that teaching comprehensive sexuality education is not going to make kids promiscuous. On the contrary, the more young people understand about their bodies and have agency over their bodies and their desires, the less apt they are to engage in risky behavior. And these gatekeepers must also come to understand the importance of using curricula and programs that have been evaluated and proven effective. When I started, Baby Think It Over was the only pregnancy prevention program in most of the counties in Georgia. Remember Baby Think? Is there anyone here who doesn't know what Baby Thinks It Over? When a girl is sent home with a doll that looks like a baby and that cries at given times. In other words, at the end of a certain amount of time that the young girl has had this baby with her, crying at inconvenient times, it's supposed to make her feel that it's way too much trouble and she doesn't want to have a baby. Like things work that way. Not all curricula and programs work with all teens and in all cultures. So GCAPP provides communities with a variety of choices. This ability to choose what best suits their specific needs is important on so many levels, as you can imagine. And it goes back to one of the things that I learned at the Cairo conference. Having a choice is empowering. GCAPP runs a number of different programs with acronyms like EQUIP and WISE and Peer Up and P3, and you can go onto our website and learn about them. Together, GCAPP, the Jane Fonda Center, and the Grady Teen Clinic, grassroots, academic, and clinical, form a symbiotic three-legged stool on behalf of adolescent sexuality and reproductive health in Georgia. Since we started in 1995, Georgia's teen pregnancy rate has dropped 50%. I can't claim that it was all because of us. Unfortunately, it took HIV/AIDS to motivate a lot of young people to use contraception more frequently and responsibly. But we are the go-to organizations in the state who've kept this issue of adolescent sexuality and reproductive health on the front burner. I could keep talking for hours. I could talk for an hour just about boys. I have a soft spot in my heart for boys. But I'm going to end now, so there'll be plenty of time for questions and answers. And let me say in closing that I hope and pray that you have the chance to intersect with adolescents, you who have the chance to intersect with adolescents in the most intimate ways. will not just provide them with sexuality information and contraception. I hope that you will connect with them in love, compassion, and full understanding of their reality. You may be the only one who does, and it can be transformative. It was for me. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And I want to thank Bill Staten because he's been such a help on so many levels. He's a member of our board, and he helped me a lot with my book. He also helped me before. I went to Random House about 5 years ago, and I said, I want to write a book about adolescent sexuality. And they said, okay. But first, we want you to write a book about aging. So I did. It's called Prime Time. And Bill and Kathy Staten feature prominently in the book. I interviewed a lot of couples on sexuality and relationships who have made it over the long haul. And boy, do they have a story. Thank you both for everything you've done for me. Thank you. So who has questions?
Halfway.
You can just yell. It's not that.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm specifically interested in education in the South, and my family's Southern as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm just curious as to what you found to be most helpful. And you said talking to the gatekeepers. How do you talk with gatekeepers who are maybe culturally value things very different from the things that you value, and how do you get them to meet you halfway without compromising too much?
That's a very profound question, and I'll have to be honest. It's not Jane Fonda who ends up being opposite those people. I mean, I have been opposite them a lot, but for example, we try to go into the counties. And Georgia has a lot of counties. They're called carriage counties. I don't know historically why it's true, but there are a lot of very small counties. And so we would go to the places that had the highest rates, and they were always the poorest. It's where there's poverty that there's high rates of teen pregnancy. It's that thing about not seeing a future that motivates you to want to not have children. I'm not the one who does it, but in the 20 years that I lived in Georgia, I was at the table with those kind of people enough to know that you just say, well, this isn't going to work. And you don't because there's some people, their whole identities are staked on the evils of contraception and the evils of sexuality education. And they really believe that. It's like fetus personhood. But where we have had success, Albany being one of them, and very, very hard community to go into, very, very high rates of poverty and teen pregnancy. And it took about a year, and we started with the pastors. We find in Georgia that when you're working with the churches that's a very good way to get in. If there are pastors that believe you and give you their stamp of approval, that opens up a lot of doors. And then the mayors, and it's just time. And taking the time to talk to them, and it can take a year before we are actually welcomed into a county. A year of meeting those gatekeepers. The other thing that we ran into a lot was meeting the teachers that teach sex education are very often not people who should be teaching sex education. And, you know, to the extent that we could, we try to work with them to help them get over their own issues. You know, they just needed good therapy. Unresolved issues of their own, sometimes abuse. And so that would be a win-win. And it's very sad when you come upon a teacher who's teaching it who really shouldn't be, and you have to kind of have them not teach it anymore. But, you know, it's just a lot slower in a place like in the South, I think. You have a lower level of adults who have graduated high school, and so very often the children also don't graduate high school. I mean, it's, there's you know what I'm talking about. You come from the South. A lot of listening. I mean, that's what I learned most of when I moved to Georgia. I had only lived in places like New York and Los Angeles. And people who say they're elitist, it's true. And I wouldn't have known how true it was until I went to the red clay of Georgia. And I feel blessed that I had that experience. And it taught me to listen with a great deal of compassion and humility. And so I think first you go in and you listen, and you're very gentle and you don't judge. You know, it was very important to me to get over being judgmental. So those are the general things that I can say.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi. So I'm over here.
Hi.
Hi. So I've met you at Columbia University in New York, along with Eve Ensler, at a V-Day forum. I think it was maybe it was last year, at the end of last year. I've gotten my youth involved with the V-Day organization. I've done some work a little bit with the V-Day organization since college. And I just wanted to know, what is your involvement with the V-Day org and Eve Ensler?
I love Eve Ensler from the bottom of my heart. Those of us who have, well, you know, friends. Is there anything more important, especially when you're my age? Everything falls away but friends. And Eve is one of those friends who puts starch in my spine and gives me hope. And God knows we need hope these days. And she gives it to me. No matter how bad things are, she always sees hope. I'm on her board. We're very, very close. 10 days from now, I'll be in Boston to see her new play, OPC, Overly Politically Correct. If by any chance any of you come from Boston, okay. Is it art? Is that the name of the... Harvard has taken Eve into their... What do you call it? I don't know. Art. Yes. She has been building this play under the sheltering wings of art at Harvard. I love it when someone like Eve is at Harvard. I once tried to do something about gender and education at Harvard. Did someone scream or sneeze? I tried to work with Carol Gilligan at Harvard, but then Larry Summers came along and, you know. Anyway. Yes, Eve is important, and I work with her like that. And I love the fact that in my conference bag, there is a pillow vagina. And when you open it up, there's flowers where the clitoris should be, and I can't wait to give it to Eve. She probably already has it. I think her vagina probably does have flowers in it. I wish I knew for sure. Maybe I'll try.
My name is Shauna, and I work in Southern California as a teacher in juvenile court schools. And I'm happy to hear that on the young men. And I'm looking to create a paternity prevention curriculum specifically for that targeted incarcerated population. So what would be your one piece of advice or summary of what to provide for adolescent males in general?
Yes, I would go online, look up Michael Kimmel, Kimmel. He wrote, among other things, Guyland and Angry White Men, and he and I are talking about doing a book together. He works with incarcerated males, and he would be able to speak to that very well. Michael Kimmel. He has the Center for Men and Masculinities at Stony Brook.
Hello. Oh, sorry.
My turn? Okay.
Yeah, your turn.
First of all, thank you so much for coming and for doing all the work you do as part of our team. But I work with middle school kids and love doing that. So in particular, 11 and 12-year-old girls, which we all know at that age start to lose their self-esteem and body image. And so I often talk to them about the impact of the media images that they see. So if I could take back a pearl of wisdom from someone on the inside, what would you say to them to help them gain and sustain a lifelong healthy appreciation for media and entertainment without its negative impact on their self-esteem and self-confidence?
Yeah, that's why we did the curriculum Media Madness at the Jane Fonda Center. It's based on social inoculation theory. Because I am in the media, people ask me, how do we change the media? And I probably won't be alive to see that happen, and it may never happen, but, and Dr. Mary Pfeiffer talks about this in her book, Reviving Ophelia, too. If we can look at media with young people, we talked about this at dinner, including looking at porn with them if we discover that our young people are looking at porn. Not, oh, but yeah. Sex can be interesting and beautiful and not necessarily yucky, but do you really think that everyone looks like that? And do you think that the women are getting as much out of it as the men? In other words, I remember I was speaking to a school in Atlanta, and a father, during the Q&A, he said, I watched Sex and the City when it was on regular television with my daughter, which I thought was just brilliant, because they could say, well, what did you think about what just was talked about or said? And then they could discuss it together. It's social inoculation. It politicizes the media so that the child can distance him or herself from what they're seeing. I mean, that's the best approach, is to just go there with them and then talk about how it makes them feel. And, you know, the amount of retouching and resculpting, thank God. But young girls need to know that nobody really looks like that. I mean, they can build up your breasts, your hips, they can make your, well, you know, you know. And they just need to know that. I know what I needed to be taught at that age. Good enough is good enough. You don't have to be perfect. That, and the important thing I learned from AA, no is a complete sentence. But it's a really, really hard time, and for girls. And it was so helpful when I found out, because of Carol Gilligan, that I wasn't the only one that went through it when I was that age. That you can be bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and, oh yeah, who says? And then suddenly it's whatever you want. you know, and eating disorders and depression and all that stuff. And, you know, I was the poster child for all that until I was 62. And that's why, you know, that's one of the reasons that I wrote the book the way being a teen book the way I did, because if I'd read that book, it would have really helped me feel that I wasn't the only one and what to do about it. Yes?
You worked with Katharine Hepburn in the
I worked with Katharine Hepburn and on Golden Pond.
I still show that in my age of the family class, and students really relate to every role we deconstructed. How was she as a role model to you? What did you learn from Katharine?
I could do an hour on her, or two. Okay, what did I learn from Katharine Hepburn? You know the first thing she said to me? I don't like you. I won't go into what the context, but it was pretty serious. And she forced me to kowtow to her. She wanted to be, she was younger than I am now. She was 73, I'm 77 when she did that movie. She was no longer a star, but she was a legend. I was a star. I was the producer of the movie. I'd gotten the financing for the movie. I made it for my father. She knew all those things. She wanted to be sure that I knew that I was here and she was here. She wanted to know what the billing was, like that. One of the very first things she taught me, and she was hard. I mean, she was a tough cookie. She was prickly. It was one of the very early days of shooting, and I was standing in front of a mirror, combing my hair, getting ready on the set. She came up behind me and she reached around and she went like this. What do you want to do with this? I didn't even know what she was talking about. She said this is your box. This is what presents you to the world. What do you want that to say? I'd never thought about it. Unlike her, who was the most self-conscious person I ever knew. I mean, from the very beginning, how she looked, how she dressed, everything was very purposeful. And I used to think self-conscious was a pejorative word. And I discovered from her that it wasn't, that it's important to know how you present, to be conscious of that and to pay attention to it. And I think about that all the time now. As I get older and I begin to look back over my life and regret some things and not regret some other things. And one of the things I regret is that I didn't learn that lesson sooner. But that's the first thing she taught me. And then I had a very hard time learning to do the backflip because I'm afraid of going over backwards. And I'm afraid of cold water and all kinds of things like that. It took me a month of training. And the first time that I ever managed to actually do it on the float out in the frigid lake, and I was covered with bruises, came crawling out onto the beach. Katharine Hepburn appeared from the bushes. She'd been watching. And she walked over to me and she said, Jane, you've taught me to respect you. You've overcome your fear. This is the most important thing in life. You have to teach your children, because if you don't learn that, you'll become soggy. And I just remember thinking, thank God, because I had wanted a stunt double to do the backflip until I remembered that she did that dive in Philadelphia story and that I had to learn to do it myself or she wouldn't respect me. So anyway, so she taught me the importance of overcoming fear, so you won't be soggy. She taught me a lot. I could tell a lot of other stories. I wrote a whole chapter about it in my memoir. She was absolutely amazing. I'll tell you the last thing she said to me, okay? All three of us, my father, Katharine Hepburn, and me, were nominated for Academy Awards for that movie. My father won, and Katharine Hepburn did, and I did not. And because neither one of them were well enough to come to the awards ceremony, when I called her to congratulate her, she said to me, "You'll never catch me now." And for a moment, I didn't know what she meant. And then I realized I had 2, and she had 3. And if she hadn't won and I had, we'd be tied. But now she had 4, and I only had 2, and I'd never catch her. So competitive. Oh, my Lord. Here's another thing that I learned from her. And I really, when I was researching for the book about aging that I wrote called Prime Time, you know, I learned that architects who want to strengthen an arch put more weight on it. And that's what old women who are elders do. They take on young people. They mentor. They are elders because they've taken on the weight of wisdom and age to help others. And she was the quintessential old arch carrying a lot of weight. I mean, she took me under her wing and taught me so much. I think she did it so that I would keep talking about her after she died. But I learned a lot. And I don't stop talking about her, yes.
I just wanted to know, you mentioned your grandson a lot, and we talk a lot in our field about key messages, and I'm wondering if you had your grandson here and he had to listen to what you had to say right now, your 15-year-old grandson, he had to take his earbuds out and turn off his phone, what message would you want to share with him as a young man today?
Well, for one thing, if I gave him that kind of message, I can be sure that he would not receive it. I don't know, but I'm going up to see him. They just recently moved to Putney, Vermont. And I'm going to go out of my way to have, I think there's very little in Putney except a very, very good school and a general store. There's no restaurant but I'm going to take him to the general store and I'm going to ask a lot of questions and try not to lay any messages on him. But in general, what I would want him to know is don't disconnect your head from your heart. Remain emotionally literate. That's the big thing that happens to males within patriarchy. And it happens, what is so poignant about boys is that this loss of heart happens when they're 6. See, the loss of voice happens to girls when they're 10 or 11. They have a decade before then where they had their voice. But with boys, it happens so early that it's just the way things are. They just think it's like that. And it's very hard to raise an emotionally literate male child today. How to do that and keep them safe from bullies, safe in a society that says real men don't cry and don't be a mama's boy. And, you know, people who study child psychology say that boys tend to be torn from the mothers too soon. That whole pressure to leave mama, it happens too soon. They're not developmentally ready. And there's a cutting off of head and heart. And, you know, we elect them to be presidents. You know, who think it's all about cock. I will never forget reading a biography on Lyndon Johnson, who said, I can't pull out of Vietnam because they'll think I'm not a manly man. He was afraid of premature evacuation. How many, and he knew the war was wrong, how many men died? Because in those days it was all men over there. How many died because he was afraid of his manhood? I mean, we have to raise boys who are, that's what feminism is. It's not something just for women. It means that the way I see it is, in the broadest sense, feminism means that women aren't afraid of their strength and men aren't afraid of their tenderness and their empathy and their hearts. That's when we would come to that, on the scale that Bill Staton talks about a lot, to that center place where there's not men and women, but in the middle where we should be. And so I would do anything I could to keep my grandson and other boys in that place of not losing their heart, not being afraid to express that. Yes. Yes.
I'm Sharon, and I'm from Atlanta, and I can tell you how parish is, but no, my question for you is related to the media question. And in the day and age where there's this brick wall between individual A and individual B in the form of cell phone, where there's the sexting, the texting, the grinders, the Tinders, and it gets in the way of people really connecting with one another. And with the media curriculum that the Dayton Centers put out, what do you see as the trend and kind of where this is going in terms of what is going to come to be known as what's a real relationship?
I don't know. The Media Madness curriculum that the Jane Fonda Center put out has more to do with magazines and television and movies and things like that. I think it's all too new to be able, certainly for me, to say, we talked about it a little bit at dinner too, to know exactly, the cat's out of the bag, the genie's out of the bottle. We're not going to, it is what it is. What it's going to do to us, I don't know. Do I get scared walking in the airport like I did this morning and every single person I see is talking? But it's to an ear thing in their ear, nobody's where they are. Nobody is present. I don't know what that's going to do to us or what it's going to do to relationships. And, I'm not sure it's going to have that profound an effect on the essence of relationships, but I don't know. And I'll be dead before anyone else does either, probably.
Hi, Jane. My name's Christian. I'm actually from Omaha, Nebraska.
Yay.
Yay.
My dad came from Omaha.
Yep. My question is, you've played a lot of iconic roles, sexual iconic roles, over the years, and Barbarella, and...
That was about it.
Well, no, I'm blanking on the other one, but were you looking for those roles in discovering yourself, or did those roles end up teaching you more?
Taught me nothing.
Taught you nothing.
Except that I was married to the wrong man.
That's a good lesson,
if
too,
you really
though.
wanted it, it was about as unromantic. Do you know De Laurentiis bought the comic book Barbarella? They offered it to Brigitte Bardot, she turned it down. They offered it to Sophia Loren, she turned it down. And my husband, Roger Vadim, who'd been married to Brigitte Bardot and made a lot of very sexy movies, said that he wanted to do, then it was offered to me and he wanted to direct it, and we did it. And, it's okay. I'm sort of proud of the fact that a whole lot of young boys of a certain generation had their first erection watching Barbarella. I feel good about that. I think it's funny because I don't think it's a very sexy movie, but I guess if you're a certain age, it does. I'd like to do it again. It was almost a feminist movie. A woman running a spaceship, going to save planet Earth, but then it took a few wrong turns. I'd like to be able to do it again, but anyway, I didn't learn anything except to leave France and come back here and to become an activist. It drove me to activism, which is a good thing, yes.
Well, mine's about fitness. I grew up always doing your cardio workouts and everything, and I'm a health educator as well as a human sexuality educator. So my question is, you said you struggled with your own identity and your own body in your younger years. Is that what got you into aerobics as much as you did? And is that a message that you continue to relay to teens today, how fitness can affect your emotional health and your mental health and your body?
I'll try to do, it's a really good question, and I'll try to not take too long to answer it, because I could talk about that for a long time, too. Yes, I was bulimic for 30 years. I had major body issues, very little self-confidence, and when I was in my 40s, I went cold turkey. It was really hard, and that was when I started the workout, after. So I was like a dry drunk. I wasn't engaging in my addiction, but I hadn't healed from it, and the workout really helped me. And so I started the workout, and I was doing a lot of movies then, and a lot of them on location, and I would, after work, I would teach the workout in the basements of various hotels or whatever, and people would come, like St. George, Utah. Anybody here from St. George, Utah? Really? And not a lot of people there. And people would come from miles away to take my class. And I'd be there for a couple of months. And I remember after a while, a woman would say to me, "I'm diabetic, and I've been taking your class for a month, and I don't need to take insulin anymore." And another woman said, "For the first time in my life, I started to feel strong. I stood up to my boss." Stories like that. And I realized this doesn't have anything to do with being thin or how you look. It's all about being empowered. I am here, deal with it, kind of thing. It did that for me. It changed my life. And it's what made me want to continue with it, because it wasn't just about vanity. I realized it was profoundly empowering. I later discovered Thomas Jefferson said revolutions begin in the muscles. Who knew? Isn't that interesting? And I think, and I write a little about it in my book, people have to realize exercise is so important also for depression, which kids can battle during adolescence. So it's a very, very important thing for young people to do, not to be able to look like her or him or something like that. GCAPP, which began by standing for the Georgia Campaign for Adolescent Pregnancy Prevention, now stands for the Georgia Campaign for Adolescent Power and Potential, because we have expanded our focus to include fitness and nutrition. And it's really hard work, because we are dealing with disadvantaged populations who live in food deserts, and changing cultures about how to eat. For people who don't have a lot of money, it's very, very difficult. I'm going to be seeing Mrs. Obama, the First Lady, in 3 days, and I'm going to thank her for her leadership in the area and ask for advice. I'm also going to thank President Obama, because the change in the landscape when he became president to what it was like before, just in terms of funding, it changed everything. And I don't think he gets enough good news from the ground, So I'm looking forward to being able to say, thanks to you, pregnancy rates dropped 20% in Richmond County, for example. Anyway, that'll be fun.
All right, if everyone would please join me in thanking Ms. Fonda for her wonderful keynote.